Inspiring interviews with today's top landlords. This is the Rental Income Podcast. And now, Dan Lane.
Anthony, I'm really interested to hear what your thoughts are on this, but you think rental properties are really just kind of a simple math problem?
Yes, absolutely. So, rental properties, all the numbers are there. It's all available. And in fact, most of it is available online for free. You can do everything your realtor can do. You can look at what people are asking. You can look at what things have sold for. You can calculate the taxes. Most counties publish their tax information. If you need information on what you think the rent could be, you can go to rentometer.com and look at that, or you can look at Zillow. Everything you need is out there to figure out what it's going to cost you to acquire and operate a rental property.
On the podcast today, Anthony is going to show us the simple math that he uses to evaluate a rental property. He's going to break down one of his recent deals and show us exactly how the numbers work for him. Joining us on the show from Cleveland is Anthony Russell. We'll take a really quick break to thank our sponsors. We'll come right back and we'll talk to Anthony. A good deal on a rental property isn't going to last very long. To win properties today, you need to move quickly when a deal comes on the market, but it takes time to analyze a property. I want to let you know about an app where you can analyze deals on your phone in seconds. It's called Ask Rick, that's RIC for Rental Income Calculator. You can analyze a deal with the push of a button. You can figure out the rent, your mortgage payment, your expenses, and figure out the cash flow. If the numbers make sense, you can make an offer right there on the app, or you can send a calendar invite to your agent to see the property in person. Ask Rick is currently offering a free 7-day trial. Just search for Ask Rick in the App Store or go to Just Ask Rick. That's RIC, justaskrick.com. Whether you've been buying rental properties for years or you're looking to buy your very first rental property, the very first thing you want to do before you go out and find a great deal is to figure out your financing. The lender that I recommend is Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group. She's a nationwide lender, and her specialty is helping investors finance rental properties. Chaley has a special limited time offer just for our listeners. She will pay for your appraisal up to $500 when you close a loan with her. Just mention you heard about this on the Rental Income Podcast. If you want more details or if you're ready to get started today, just go to ridgelendinggroup.com. That's RIDGE lendinggroup.com. NMLS 42056. So, Anthony, a lot of times math can seem intimidating to people, but the rental math you think is really pretty easy, right?
Yes, absolutely. The math that we're using to calculate the profitability of rentals or the viability of them in your personal business, it's basic math. My 12-year-old can do it. It's not anything complex. What's difficult isn't calculating the math, it's trusting your numbers. Mm-hmm. That's the difficult part. Having the confidence that you've done your research, you've found the data, and you've calculated the numbers and sticking with that. That's the tough part.
I want to kind of walk through your numbers and see exactly how this works out. But before we get into that, let's talk about your portfolio a little bit. Can you tell me about the types of properties that you like to buy?
Sure. So I'm not looking at 100-unit buildings. I'm looking at 4-unit, 3-unit, 2-unit, and single family. We mainly focus on those. They have good economics, and the good news is that most conventional loans will cover them.
Yeah. And are the properties mainly in bad shape when you're buying them, or do you like places that are more turnkey and ready to go?
Oh, I love the pig with lipstick. That's what I'm always looking for. When I go on property hunting, I look for something that's been sitting on the market for 4 months, 6 months, 12 months. I look for things that the ugly color wall or the moldy carpet, because the reality of it is that those things scare a lot of people away, but they're easy to fix. I just call my carpet guy, throw them in there. It's not a big deal.
Right. So maybe the properties are a little bit mismanaged, maybe not kept up to date.
Yes.
Okay.
Those are the properties that we're truly targeting. We're looking for things that have people. We want properties that are currently rented, so that we know that people are interested in the area, and we look for things that are being mismanaged. So if like I've gone into properties and the water heater will like literally be leaking on the floor, or you can see things in clear disrepair. Those are the properties I want to be in.
Right. Now, why do you want tenants that are already in place? Like, do you just so that you have the cash flow on day one, or like what's your thinking there?
Yes. So that's our main concern, is that when we take over a building, that we have some type of immediate cash flow coming in. The rent doesn't have to be at market value. Most of the time it's not at market value. And we handle that as we have to. But my main concern is that when we take a building over, that it's not just bleeding out right away, because it might take me 2 or 3 months to get everything, fully rehabbed, or more, maybe, depending on what is required.
Right.
So we like to just blunt the bleeding a little bit with the cash flow. It's not always a perfect system.
So if the properties are kind of in disrepair and you've got tenants in place, are you fixing them up while the tenant's living there?
Yes. So we immediately come in and we do the things that we can right away. So a lot of times these properties are just way behind in repairs, simple things that can be done, fixing like faucets and toilets, things like that. We can do that while the tenants are in place. As far as things like repainting or recarpeting, usually what we'll do is we'll wait for our unit to go vacant. And then we'll either play like musical chairs with the tenants in the building and swap them around, or the tenant that's living there will, offer them an opportunity to have it done while they're there. Or sometimes tenants get scared off when buildings get transferred and they just leave. They end up leaving and we end up doing it. But we don't actively try and kick anybody out to rehab the building. If somebody's happy there, we don't want to kick them out. We'll wait till the unit is flipped, and then we'll fully rehab it. But usually we try and do as much as we can right away.
Let's talk about some of the resources that you mentioned at the top of the show. So when you're first looking at a potential property or maybe a different neighborhood, what are you looking at? Like what kind of online resources are you checking out?
So I have 3 sites that I really like to use. I'm not affiliated with them. They're not paying me to say it. I use them because they're the tools that I use. I use Zillow to check for recently sold properties and sometimes things that are on the market or that maybe come into market. I also use Zillow for looking at rent in the area for comparable rents. I look at Realtor.com for, they seem to have a fairly up-to-date MLS listing. I don't think it's perfect, but it's pretty good. I've gotten actually a few properties from Realtor.com. I found them on there. So usually what my workflow would look like is I'll go find everything on Realtor.com that matches my specific search criteria. And then I'll switch over to Zillow, go plot it on the map, figure out where it's at, figure out what the comparables are, because Zillow will let you see, what was recently sold in the area. So I can get an idea if the person's asking a fair price or not. And then also I'll start pulling rental comparables from the area. And I'll also use rentometer.com to pull comparable rent. And I kind of get an idea. So just based on that, I can get an idea of what my mortgage is going to be. I'll look up the taxes on the county auditor's site, figure out what that's going to be. I generally know I can ballpark what my insurance is going to be. And then once I know the rent, I can tell you if a property is priced attractively to me or not. And if it's close, I only look for properties that are run down, that are sitting on the market for a while. So that seller is likely going to be willing to negotiate on their price if they really want to sell their property. Right. So I can bring the price down from there.
All right. Well, let's dive into the numbers here. And maybe it would be helpful to look at one of your recent deals to kind of make sense of this. So there's a duplex that you bought recently. Maybe we can talk about those numbers.
Sure.
What did you maybe can you tell me about the property a little bit?
Okay, so the property is a duplex. It's a side-by-side, 3-bedroom on each side. The property wasn't in horrible condition, but it wasn't in livable condition either when we bought it. It was partially rented. The neighborhood is, I'd say it's like a C-class neighborhood.
Okay, let's get into some numbers on that property to figure out how the math works. Let's start with the purchase price. How much did you pay for that property?
Okay, so at the end of the day, I ended up paying $45,000 for the property.
Okay. And the property, I assume, needed some work. How much did you put into rehabbing the property?
Between the roof and some appliances and carpet, I want to say at the end of the day, it was in the $10,000 to $13,000 ballpark.
All right, so all in, you're somewhere maybe around $58,000 for the purchase and the rehab.
Correct.
Okay, and then after the rehab, what would you say the property was worth?
Immediately after, it was worth in the $60,000 to $70,000 range, and then today it's worth $75,000 to $80,000.
Okay, so by fixing it up, you didn't necessarily create a ton of equity. You really kind of just brought it up to the neighborhood standards.
Right. Yeah, we focus on cash flow over property appreciation in our business strategy.
Yeah. I guess that makes sense. I mean, the only time that the price really matters is when you're buying or when you're selling, or I guess when you're refining too.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So the cash flow is really the most important part. Okay. So let's kind of break down the numbers to see how the math works. So what's the total rent for the building?
So the total rent today is $1,400.
Okay.
And the market value is $1,500. So there's a little room for growth.
Okay. So why is that? Did you just price it a little bit below market?
No, we don't raise rents on tenants annually. We usually do that when we have turnover, or if they are there for 4 or 5 years, or 3 or 4 years, we'll raise the rent up a little bit each time.
Okay. All right. So let's break down the math on how this works. So I guess you've really got two kinds of expenses: the expenses you can control and the expenses you can't control. So for the ones that you can't control, that's your taxes and insurance. That's really kind of set. How much are your taxes and insurance for that building?
For that building, the taxes are just a little bit over $100 a year. I'm sorry, $100 a month, not $100 a year.
Right. Okay.
And the insurance is right around $80 a month.
$80 a month. Okay. Now, for the repairs, repairs are tough because you've obviously fixed the property up, so hopefully you're not going to have a ton of repairs. But I mean, the way it's always worked for me is you might have a long period of time where nothing comes up, and then all of a sudden you get hit with a repair bill, maybe a big one, maybe a small one, but you really can't control it or really 100% predict what your repairs are going to be. So how do you deal with that?
So what we like to do is, first off, all of our properties pay for each other. We don't separate out the budgets for each individual property. If one needs a $10,000 repair, everybody's pitching in to fix it. So that's the first thing. Yep. But the standard rule of thumb for us is that we'll set aside, maybe 10%, 15% of the gross profit, not the net profit. We'll set 10 to 15% of the side of the gross profit for repairs each month. Okay. We'll just stick it in savings. It's nothing crazy.
Okay. So that's about $140 a month that you just stick in savings so that you have it when you need it.
That's right.
Okay. And now the other thing that you really, I guess is an expense that's going to vary is vacancy. And what I think is amazing about your history is you really don't have any vacancy with your rentals. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. In the last 11 years, 10, 11 years, I can count on one hand how many months that we have been vacant. And the truth of it is those months that we were vacant were because we had a massive rehab project that we were doing. It was a very big deal. We couldn't do it all in 1 month. So really, we don't have vacancy. We don't take vacancy. What we do is when a lease is coming to an end, we immediately turn around and re-rent the apartment. So when a lease is coming to an end, I tell the tenants I need to know within 60 days that they're leaving. And if they don't tell me that they want to stay, then I assume they're leaving, and I go in and I start doing the repairs right away. And then with maybe 30, 45 days left, I'll list the apartment and start showing it. And one of two things is going to happen. Either the tenant is going to decide they want to stay and they will sign a new lease, or the new person will sign a lease and I will issue, I'll say, hey, we officially rented your apartment. This is your last day. This is when we expect you out. And by the time they leave, all the little repairs have been done. Anything that needs fixed is complete. The only thing that really needs to happen is I need to run through there with a paintbrush to do a little touch up on the walls, and we need to get it steam cleaned.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you can't argue with that. I mean, you've had over 10 years with no vacancy. So that's good. Now, what are you doing to retain tenants? I mean, so do you not have much turnover, or is it just that the people are always giving you notice before they're leaving?
Oh, so our vacancies, it's a mix. I mean, it's a mix. Any property owner is going to get a mix. It's some people, they have life events and they want to leave. We have a really liberal escape clause. I think that's another part of our low vacancy is we have a very liberal escape clause. Look, I'm not trying to take 6 months rent from somebody if they want to leave, if they want to break their lease. I tell everybody, and I make it well known to everybody that comes in, if you give me 2 months notice, just 2 rent cycles, that's all I need. You can break your lease. There's no penalty. I'm not going to hold your feet to the fire. And it's for the same exact reason the way I for the same exact reason for the things I do when a lease is ending. I want to be able to get in there, repair it, and release it. The apartments are much easier to lease when there's somebody in there. Mm-hmm. So, I have liberal escape clauses, and people take advantage of that. Maybe they get married, maybe they, get a job in a different city, whatever. But that's usually how I handle those.
I think that makes a lot of sense, that they give you notice that they want to leave, and that gives you time to find somebody new. And the benefit to you is you have someone there that wants to live there, and you've, again, avoided vacancy by doing that.
Absolutely. And it keeps us honest,
right.
Because look, if there is a liberal escape clause in every single one of my leases, I know that if I don't get up there and I do the work and get things fixed and keep these people happy, I'm not going to have tenants. So it helps keep our properties nice. It keeps the tenants happy. They feel empowered. It's a win for everybody.
Right. Okay. All right. Now back to the math. So the only other expense that you should have with the rental property is going to be your financing. Do you have a mortgage on this property?
Not on the duplex, but I do have a couple other mortgages.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. But for this property, there's no financing on it. So when you subtract out your repairs, your taxes, your insurance, you should be at about $1,075 a month is your
correct.
Cash flow. So, I mean, that's really awesome. When you look at, you're making just over $1,000 a month on a $58,000 investment. That's 22%. That is,
that's right.
That is really, really pretty awesome. So those are basically the numbers. So when you say that the math is simple, that's the math that you're looking at. Is you're looking at, okay, what are the rents going to be? What are my expenses? And figuring out how much you're going to profit. It's really just as simple as that, right?
It is. And I'd like to make a point that the numbers were better than what we projected. So when we do these projections on these properties, when you look at rent, you're never going to get exactly what the rent is going to be. You're going to get a range. And you have to say, okay, well, I'm going to be either at the upper end or the lower end or right in the middle, somewhere in there. So we like to do all of our projections expecting the worst case scenario. And when we do that, it really positions us for success, because if we take over a building and we've already planned to be profitable in the worst case scenario, then guess what? Our worst case scenario, we still have a winning building. But it's rarely, if ever, the worst case scenario, right? So,
Right.
We fixed up the property, we put people in there that want to be there, everybody wins, and we're not getting the low end of that bar. We're getting the upper end. And on top of it, rents are going up. So, not only did we get a cheap property that is in good condition, but now we're getting, phenomenal returns on it as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's why I love real estate, is that you're going to get those rent increases every year. So every year your return should get a little bit better. Plus the property is appreciating. So you're making money there too. Owning rentals just makes so much sense to me. I really love it. And then the other thing that you mentioned that I think is important to point out to anybody new that's listening is that I feel like so many investors new investors, when they're analyzing a deal, they get so hung up on what the expenses are going to be. And you have no control over that. You can have a ballpark, you can have an estimate, but you just don't know exactly what it's going to be. And I think most investors would probably account for vacancy, and most people probably should account for some vacancy. But if you run things right, like you are, you don't have any vacancy. So putting 10% vacancy on your projections would bring your cash flow down, but in reality, that's just not an expense that you have.
Right. Yeah. You're just doing risk mitigation with all the math. So there's plenty of people, and I'm sure that some of the properties I've bought were from these people that just jump in feet first, no calculations. They just got a lot of cash or maybe, a pre-approval, and they want to be a landlord, and they jump in and they don't take the time to do any research to figure out what their return is going to be. The expenses really are not that hard to calculate. If you can do basic adding and subtracting, you can be a math whiz when it comes to real estate. So it's not hard. It's just making sure you take the time to do it, and then trusting your numbers. Don't calculate 10% for repairs and then hold 30% because you don't need it. It's just, you got to trust yourself.
Yeah. And I think another thing that you're doing is you're really rehabbing those properties up front. So I think that's keeping your expenses down. It's a lot cheaper to fix a faucet on your schedule than it is if you get an emergency call over the weekend that there's a big flood.
Yeah, that ties into our property leadership style. We like to take a proactive approach. A lot of landlords will tell you, when they see a tenant, they turn the other way because that's when all the repairs come up. Well, guess what? That's what I want to hear those things.
Right, exactly.
If there's a leaky faucet, or if somebody's ceiling is getting spots, or if a window is broken, I want to hear those things because it gives me an opportunity to fix it. If my time commitment is 5 hours a month or 10 hours a month or whatever, it's a lot better than a 40-hour week. All at once, just to get it flipped at the last minute, and another thing is scheduling people is not always easy. I have a painter that I always go to, but I have to schedule him like a month out. It's not that simple. Right. So, staying on top of things, that's a big part of our leadership strategy for our properties. And I think it's a big reason why we have so much success with them.
Yeah, I really think you're doing things right. And you have written a book talking more about your leadership style. Tell us about your book.
Yeah, so the book is called Leadership for Landlords, and it's just essentially it's a modern approach to property leadership. It's taking my experiences from the military. I served as an Army sergeant in the Military Police Corps in the Army for 5 years. I saw combat in Iraq, spent 15 months there. I led soldiers in the United States, and I took those experiences from the military on leadership and the empathetic approach and relationship building with your soldiers, and I applied it directly to property management.
Again, the name of Anthony's book is called Leadership for Landlords, and if you want to look that up later on, I've got a link to it on the website. You can find it at rentalincomepodcast.com/episode 329. If Anthony inspired you and you're ready to buy your first rental property or you want to add to your portfolio, The lender that I recommend is our sponsor today. It's Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group. Chaley is a nationwide lender, and her specialty is helping investors finance rental properties. She has a ton of different loan programs, and she can find something customized to you for your situation. Chaley has a special offer just for our listeners. If you mention Rental Income Podcast, she will pay for your appraisal up to $500. If you want to find out more, or you want to set up a time to talk to Chaley personally, just go to ridgelendinggroup.com. That's RIDGE lendinggroup.com. NMLS 42056. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast today. We've got new episodes every single Tuesday, and if you subscribe, you'll get notified as soon as they come out. My name is Dan Lane, and this has been the Rental Income Podcast.